Level 1. The Trap. 15 years ago, you walked through the doors of Dunbrook Freight and Supply for the first time. 22 years old. A duffel bag of ambition and absolutely no plan. The manager who hired you? A heavy-set man named Griggs who chewed toothpicks like they owed him money. Shook your hand and said, "Work hard, kid, and there's no ceiling here." You believed him. Genuinely. For almost 3 full years, you believed every word of that sentence. You clocked in at 5:45 in the morning, before the sun even considered showing up. You loaded pallets until your forearms burned. You memorized the names of forklifts like they were pets. Big Red, the Widowmaker, Old Betsy, the one with the busted left wheel that pulled sideways if you weren't careful. You told yourself every single day that this was temporary. A launch pad. Something you'd tell stories about later from some office with a window, in some life that hadn't started yet. Year 3 came and went. Year 5. Year 7. You got married in year 4. To a woman named Elena who worked the front desk at a dental office 2 miles down the road, who laughed at your terrible jokes like they were actually funny, who believed in the launchpad story just as hard as you did. You had a daughter in year 6. You named her after Elena's grandmother. And somewhere in there, quietly, without a single dramatic moment to mark it, the launchpad stopped being a launchpad. It just became the floor. The promotions went to other people, younger people sometimes, people with degrees, or people who golfed with Griggs on weekends, or people who simply asked louder and more often than you did. Your raises arrived like apologies. 40 cents one year, 55 the next. Once a full dollar that felt, for about a week, like you'd won something. By year 10, you'd stopped counting the raises. You'd started counting something else instead. How many hours of daylight you actually saw in a given week? The answer, most weeks, was almost none. Your daughter started asking why you were always tired. You didn't have a good answer for a 7-year-old, so you just said, "Work makes daddy sleepy." And she accepted that the way kids accept most sad, true things, without questioning it too hard. There was a man on your line named Danny, trained you back in year 1. 22 years in by the time this story really starts. Danny had a joke he liked to repeat. This place is a life sentence with dental. And for a long time, that joke was the funniest thing you'd heard all week. By year 12, you'd stopped laughing at it. By year 13, it stopped feeling like a joke at all. That was the year your father got sick. Nothing sudden, just the slow kind of sick that eats a family's savings one hospital bill at a time. You picked up every overtime shift Dunbrook would let you touch. You sold your motorcycle, the one thing you'd bought just for yourself in 15 years. You watched your bank account do what it always did, which was exist right at zero, breathing shallow, never quite dying, never quite living either. Your father passed in the spring of year 14. At the funeral, an uncle you barely knew pulled you aside and said, not unkindly, "You work too hard for too little, you know that?" You nodded. You didn't say anything back. But something in your chest had already started to crack. Quietly, the way a windshield cracks from a rock you never even saw hit it. You don't notice at first. You just notice weeks later that the whole thing is spreading. Level 2. The Reckoning and the Decision. The crack finally became a full break on an ordinary Tuesday, 15 years and 2 months into the job. You were in the break room. Same table you'd eaten 1,000 lunches at. Same turkey sandwich because Elena packed the same lunch out of habit and exhaustion and you never once complained. 2 new hires sat 2 tables over. Kids, really. 23, 24. One of them, a wiry guy with a septum piercing, was telling the other one his 5-year plan. "I'm out of here in 2 years, tops," he said. "This is just a bridge job. Get some capital, then I'm doing something real." Something in your chest tightened so hard, you actually put the sandwich down, because you remembered saying that sentence, word for word, 15 years and 2 months ago. You did the math right there at that sticky break room table while a fluorescent light flickered above your head like it was trying to warn you about something. 15 years of 5:45 mornings. 15 years of forearms that ached before 8 a.m. 15 years of overtime, holiday shifts, missed birthdays, a motorcycle sold, a father buried, and your actual net worth. The number you finally forced yourself to calculate that night, sitting at your kitchen table with Elena asleep upstairs and your daughter's nightlight mug glowing faintly down the hall, came out to $3,600. Not 300,000. 3,600. For 15 years of your one and only life. You didn't cry. You didn't throw anything. You just sat there in the quiet of your kitchen, staring at a number on a legal pad like it was a stranger's face. And then, very softly, you said something out loud to an empty room. I've been surviving instead of building. It didn't fix anything, but it planted something you couldn't unplant. For the next month, almost nothing changed on the outside. Same shifts, same forklifts, same Danny, same joke, same toothpick-chewing Griggs walking the floor like a king surveying a very small, very tired kingdom. But on the inside, you had started doing something you hadn't done in 15 years. You started paying attention. You opened a banking app you normally only glanced at, and this time you actually read it. Every line, every subscription, every fee. It was uglier than you expected. A truck payment eating almost a third of your paycheck. A gym membership you hadn't used in 4 years. No retirement plan beyond a vague, unexamined faith that the company probably has something. You wrote every number down on that same legal pad, like a man performing an autopsy on his own financial life. And then, 3 weeks later, you made the decision. Quietly, without telling anyone at first, not even Elena. You weren't going to quit Dunbrook. You couldn't, not with a daughter, not with a mortgage, not with the memory of your father's hospital bills still fresh enough to burn. The decision was smaller than quitting, and in its own way, far stranger. You decided that for the next 14 months, every single extra dollar that touched your life, every overtime check, every tax refund, every dollar you weren't already spending on survival and would go toward exactly one thing. A down payment on a rental property. Not a mansion, not an empire. One small, sad, forgotten 2-bedroom house, 4 streets over from your own, that had been sitting on the market for months because the roof needed work, and the kitchen looked like a time capsule from another decade. When you finally told Elena, she stared at you for a long moment across the kitchen table. We have $3,600, she said. That house needs a down payment 3 times that. How exactly does this work? It doesn't yet, you told her, but it's going to. I need 14 months, and I need you to believe me for 14 months, even on the days I don't believe myself. She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the table, put her hand over yours, and said, Okay, 14 months. That night, for the first time in longer than you could remember, you didn't fall asleep with your phone glowing on your chest. You fell asleep with the legal pad in your hands, doing math, until the numbers blurred into dreams. Level 3. The climb, the collapse, and the transformation. Here is what nobody tells you about the decision that changes everything. For a long time, it doesn't feel like a turning point. It feels like drowning slower on purpose. You picked up every overtime shift Dunbrook offered. 6-day weeks, sometimes 7. You sold the truck, the one bleeding a third of your paycheck every month, and drove Elena's father's old sedan instead, letting the guys at work make jokes about the rattling muffler. You let them. Pride, you were learning, was a luxury item, and you'd stopped being able to afford it. You canceled the gym membership, canceled cable. You and Elena started cooking every meal from scratch, and some weeks that meant rice, beans, and whatever vegetables were cheapest that day, 3 nights running. Month 5, you applied for a loan. You got denied. Not because your income was bad, because your credit history was thin, scarred by an old unpaid medical bill from your father's illness that you didn't even know had gone to collections. You spent the next 3 months on the phone, disputing it, negotiating a payment plan, watching your score creep upward one grinding point at a time. Month 8, your daughter got sick. Nothing serious, an ear infection, but it meant a copay you hadn't budgeted for, and for one terrifying week, the whole plan nearly collapsed under the weight of $140. You remember sitting in the car in the pharmacy parking lot, engine off, staring through the windshield, thinking clearly, calmly, almost peacefully, maybe this was a stupid idea. You thought about Danny, about his joke, about how easy it would be to just stop swimming and let the current of an ordinary life carry you the rest of the way. You didn't call Ilona that night to talk about giving up, but you thought about it the whole drive home. You didn't give up. Month 11, your credit score cleared the threshold. Month 13, the loan finally got approved. Smaller than you'd hoped, tighter than felt safe, but approved. Month 14, you signed the papers on the house. It needed everything. The kitchen looked untouched since some decade you weren't alive for. The first tenant you found, a young couple, was late on rent by the second month. and you had a conversation on their front porch that you'd never had before in your life. Calm, direct, terrifying. For a long stretch after that, owning the house didn't feel like the decision that changed everything. It felt like you'd invented a second, unpaid job out of thin air, on top of the first one that already owned most of your waking hours. Then, slowly, something shifted. 18 months after buying it, that tired little two-bedroom was quietly cash-flowing $210 a month after every expense, every repair, every headache. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof. Proof the math worked. Proof the 14-month promise you'd made across a kitchen table hadn't been a lie. So you did it again. You funneled that $210 plus more overtime, plus, for the first time in 15 years, a real raise you actually negotiated at Dunbrook, walking into Griggs's office with a printed page of your numbers instead of a hopeful smile. 20 months later, you closed on a second property. 3 years after that legal pad night in your kitchen, you closed on a third. By year 5 of what you and Elena had started quietly calling the plan, no fireworks, no yacht, nothing you'd see in a movie, your combined rental income crossed your Dunbrook salary for the first time. You remember the exact night you noticed. You were doing the monthly math on that same legal pad, out of habit now, almost superstition, and the rental total sat higher on the page than your paycheck stub beside it. You didn't celebrate. You just sat there in the quiet kitchen for a long minute. Then you called Elena in and slid the pad across the table without a word. She read it twice. Then she put her hand over yours the same way she had that very first night, 14 months of promise and 5 years of grinding ago. Neither of you said anything. You didn't need to. 2 years after that, you walked into Dunbrook Freight and Supply for the last time. Not angry. Not even triumphant, really. Just calm. The specific, hard-earned calm of a man who no longer needed the room to be impressed by him. Danny was still on the same line. 24 years in by then. He shook your hand on your way out, half smiling, and said the old joke one last time. Life sentence with dental. You smiled back genuinely for the first time in longer than you could remember inside that building. Not for me, you said. Not anymore. Here's what that Tuesday in the break room actually taught you. The real lesson underneath the whole 15 years. The job was never the real trap. The trap was 15 years of never once sitting down and asking honestly where every single dollar was going. You didn't need a better job. You didn't need a lucky break, a rich relative, or a miracle. You needed one brutal, honest night with a legal pad, and the decision to do something small, uncomfortable, and unglamorous, consistently, for far longer than felt reasonable. Most people never make that decision, not because they can't, but because the first year of it looks exactly like nothing is happening. It looked like nothing for you too, right up until the night the numbers on that pad quietly changed places. And you realized somewhere in the grinding middle of it all, everything already had. If your version of that break room looks a little different, a different sandwich, a different warehouse, a different Griggs, the math underneath it is still the same. And so is the decision waiting for you whenever you're ready to write the first ugly number down. If this story hit something in you, hit subscribe, because next time we sit down at a different kitchen table with a different family and a different decision that changes everything.